Melissa said she could see it growing, the grass growing today. She said,
Just watch.
yeah.
I didn't. Please rise. Pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Meeting of the Wahoo City Council, Tuesday, May 24th, 7 o'clock p.m. Announcement of the Open Meetings Act. It's posted on the wall. There are brochures available at City Hall if anybody wants to dig into it deeper. With that, we'll have call the meeting to order and roll call.
Carl Warford.
Here.
Ryan Ideas.
Here.
Karen Boop. Here. Chris Rappel.
Here.
Stuart Krejci.
Here.
Patrick Nabel.
Here.
Okay, no proclamations or announcements at this point from myself. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to speak to something that is not on the agenda?
So my name is Mike Sullivan, familiar face. Just want to bring up this poster that was posted up by Kennedy College. Coming soon, large apartment complex, spring of 2023. Seems kind of unusual, as I've been to many meetings in the past for other projects. One that I'm doing close to this building. It's called the Hondo Apartments. Just want to ask if anyone's known about this project or if this is something that could be a distraction to a project that I'm potentially working on. So I just want to bring it up.
I can speak a little bit to that. I think several of the council members somehow found out about it this weekend. The owner of the property has had a conversation with the city, with planning and zoning, and I talked to the owner at noon today. He saw that there was other condos, housing being developed in that area, and so he thought maybe he would look at it. He owns the president's house, and he told me he's put out a feeler to a developer to see if it's feasible.
Cool.
So,
Yeah, just curious about the project. Look forward to hearing more about it in the future. Again, I'm pro development, obviously, but just kind of curious how that one portrays. So I'll check in later then. So thank you.
What was the name of it, by the way, you said?
It's Hondo. I mean, you can drive up to Kennedy College. It's up there. A big sign, like 10 by 10. Kind of unusual, but it looks nice in a certain spot, but doesn't really fit the neighborhood in my opinion. So.
What's the rest of what you were saying?
the rest of, the owner is Nate Varner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was his interest?
As far as I know, I never had any conversation with Nate regarding anything with that.
Well, I guess my question would be to follow up on that is how can he put up a sign saying coming in 2023, this luxury high-rise apartment if he hasn't even presented it to anyone?
It's a little premature.
Probably not a good idea, but there's nothing illegal about it.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you. I'll probably be up here in a little bit.
Yeah. I think he's talked a little bit, what's the process for demolition of a house. I think that's the extent of it, so. Very premature, just have to see. I did tell him some of the steps he has to go through, and I think he's aware of that now, so. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Department head reports. I'll start. Ryan, you want to Nothing other than what's on the agenda?
Add to the report that's in the agenda,
Okay,
other than what we're gonna be speaking about later on.
okay. Denise, anything?
Just real quick, I'll come up, just wanted to let you know that summer reading program has started, and it's been really super busy. And we'll be doing the polka night, well, actually, this Friday, magician Jeff Quinn is at the Civic Center at 10:30 Friday morning. So if you have nothing to do and you wanna go see some awesome magic, go to the Civic Center and see Jeff Quinn. I still have free countertop available in the former computer lab. We ripped out, my husband took out all the old Formica countertop. So if anybody wants any countertop for like a man cave or a shed or something that's legally allowed in the city of Wahoo, you could put that countertop in that place and get it out of the library for me. Thank you, Karen, for taking my glass blocks tonight and getting those out. Also, we'll be having polka night at the library on the 24th of June, so that'll be fun. We're doing pint-sized polka. Our presenter's coming from Wisconsin, and so, you know, polka music, and Patrick's wife is gonna be doing kolaches, I hope. I gotta get a hold of her.
She will.
So it's gonna be awesome. So fun times at the library. And also, we are submitting a picture for the LARM calendar, and it's gonna be awesome. So you'll be buying us lunch, Melissa.
Okay.
Chief snuck in. Department head reports.
I don't have much more than the council report to add. We did go through a vetting process for assistant chief position. We had about 7 people show interest in the position. We started out with a questionnaire. We had them answer, and then we moved some people on from the questionnaire. Then we did an assessment center where they answered the same questions, and they were graded upon there. I had some people help me do some of the grading of those questionnaires from the assessment center, and then we did a chief's interview, kind of set them down, explained to them what I was expecting them, and then we ended up settling on Al Sullivan to be the next assistant chief police. You know, I know he kind of had a leg up on it since he was there working the position, and what he's going to be heading up a lot is the clerical side of the house, helping me on that side of the house, getting that up and running in order. As you guys know, I think Abby, our records clerk, moved to Iowa, so we are in the hunt for a new records clerk, and that's where we, are probably the biggest struggle right now, keeping guys on the street and not in the office doing reports and stuff. But that's basically it. Does anybody have any questions for me? No? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Travis?
Nothing new.
Nothing other than what's on here?
Yep, yeah. No, in addition to what Joe had to say, we did receive notification that we received the body worn camera grant, which will fund up to $9,200 for replacing the body worn cameras for the police department. The other thing, we have a pre-construction meeting scheduled this week for the 2022 street improvement asphalt overlay project. That's again along Linden and Beach between 7th and 11th. I have reached out to all of the abutting property owners and invited them to send me their email address to be included on a construction update. I've also, have all of you on that email. Did you get an email from me earlier this week?
Yeah.
Or maybe it was just the 2 in the ward, but I can add everyone onto it. But if someone approaches you about it and they have questions, please encourage them to provide me with that contact information. I'd be glad to include them. And along with what Joe said, also we have an office assistant job opening at City Hall, G-Works specialist, materials or inventory manager position open, and there's one other. Second class one, yes. So those jobs are all posted on the city's website.
Concludes your
That
report.
concludes my report.
Okay, Joven, anything other than what's on the agenda? Okay, the consent agenda, fairly detailed, some things that,
On the send bill, how many properties are we improving? you know, just like a lot of per hour things, I couldn't really
Oh.
remember what we talked about.
We allotted $25,000 per projects. I don't know the specific count. I can ask Sen for an updated report if you like.
But to you, the invoice looks accurate, cause it's hard to really decipher.
Yeah, they actually, yes, it does.
I would make a motion.
They
to
purposefully
approve.
don't provide a lot of information to keep,
Yes, keep anonymity.
yes.
Have a motion to approve, is there a second?
A second.
Okay, a second. Any other questions? Roll call on the consent agenda.
Creachy,
Yes.
Boop,
Yes.
Nagel,
Yes.
Ideas,
Yes.
Raffle,
Yes.
Warford.
Yes.
Okay, public hearings and associated action, none there, old and tabled business. Approval of development agreement between City of Wahoo and People of Destiny Ministries Incorporated regarding the development projects at the formerly Kennedy College campus, and authorization for the mayor to sign said agreement. Joe, would you
Yeah,
fill
so
in some blanks maybe?
obviously, I think everybody generally was in attendance 2 council meetings ago where Pastor Vernon had proposed during the council meeting to what I'll refer to as bifurcate the previously proposed agreement. The previously proposed agreement prescribed a timeline for getting all the professional work done with respect to structural engineering, design, permitting, all of those sorts of things in place by certain dates, and then had a secondary timeline for completion of the actual construction themselves. Those were dates that previously were proposed by Pastor, but when he went out and started trying to find contractors and seeing what pricing was like under this environment, he was finding some difficulty for that. So we kind of wrestled back and forth with respect to that secondary issue on the construction timeline. And what, as I understood it, he was proposing during the council meeting was, look, let's hold off making decisions with respect to construction. The hope, I think, on his part is that the construction cycle will lighten a little bit, right? Laborers will become a little more available, material costs will come down. But in the meantime, let's focus on the design aspect of this and potentially what the permitting might look like. We'll tackle and wrestle that issue. So what I did following that council meeting is I went into the previous development agreement, took out all those construction deadlines, as well as the liquidated damage clause associated with the construction deadline, and left in just the timeline that they were proposing for the professional side of things. Provided that to Pastor. Pastor has since signed that agreement, so provided that the council doesn't have any concerns, I think we're ready to go ahead and execute that, allow for Pastor to bring in the professionals, the architect, the engineer, that sort of thing that he needs, and then this fall kind of retackle or address, you know, what that permitting and that construction timeline might look like based on the facts that exist at that time. Any questions about the draft or the project in general?
So now we broke the project into 2 pieces.
Yes.
So the first
exactly.
piece now comes due September 30th.
Yes, yeah, so basically, he's gonna do everything but hire a contractor and seek a permit application, which I think will enable probably everybody, the city included, to maybe have more facts, more information with respect to what the design's gonna look like, what the drainage study looks like, where the parking's going to be, what the structural issues are with respect to the property, you know, all those sorts of things. So, from my perspective, non-legal perspective, I think this makes sense.
Pretty much outlines a process to get to the point where a building permit could be executed, assuming everything is cleared.
So what happens if this takes longer than September 30? What happens on November 1st? I see that there's exchange for actions described above. City agrees to forego any enforcement actions until November 1st.
And you hit the nail on the head right there, which is, there is no liquidated damage penalty. There's not a monetary amount they have to pay to the extent that they miss those deadlines. The stick, so to speak, for lack of a better term, that the city has is, look, if it's not done, we haven't seen progress on this, the city has the right as of November 1st to go back to the enforcement side of things and deal with the structural issues and the like.
Any other questions? What's the council's?
I would make a motion to approve. I'm glad this is moving forward. I'm glad to see that it's already been signed by Reverend Berman.
I'll second.
Second over here, okay. Any other questions? Okay, roll call on the development agreement.
Krejci,
Yes.
Nagel,
Yes.
Ideas,
Yes.
Rappel,
Yes.
Warford,
Yes.
Booth.
Yes.
Okay, number 2, approval of purchase power agreement with Soul Systems LLC as recommended by the Board of Public Works and authorization for the mayor to sign said agreement. Ryan is ready to speak to it.
Yeah, and I could maybe defer to Joven to give some feedback from the actual contract negotiations. Renee Fellmeyer was the lead from the law firm and drove, I think, a pretty tough and thorough negotiation. I think we got a lot out of what we wanted into the contract, and so I'll let Joven speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, to Ryan's point, I think I had asked Renee talking about it today, knowing she wasn't also going to be present, to put together a short summary. I think that got emailed out, which kind of identified the process from her perspective and basically said, hey, if there's risks here, it's less legal and it's more practical with respect to what happens in the event of a default on the city side. There's pretty hefty penalties because obviously the solar company is investing significant resources in putting a solar facility where it's going to be putting it, entering into lease obligations with respect to those properties, and so they want a financial long-term commitment from the city to be the consumer of the electricity or the solar energy that's coming off of that. And so there's heavy penalties in there to the extent that we are not a consumer. The good thing, as Renee indicated within her kind of memorandum, is that risk is somewhat minimal in this perspective because we are the primary consumer. So we do control what we need and what our recourses are, and obviously it provides a financial incentive to continue to consume from that form or that vehicle. To the extent that the opposite happens and the default in some way as a result of failure to provide energy or otherwise is coming from the solar company, there is language built into the agreement that allows us to terminate the agreement and that financial commitment going forward. So there's significant risks to that. On both ends, there's what we call force majeure clause, meaning if there's acts of God, that sort of thing, that prevent either us or them from fulfilling the terms of the contract, there's basically a pause button that the contract says we're going to hit, and we're going to wait until those conditions expire, and then we'll revisit and reobligate the parties to do so. So I think Renee certainly felt like, in large part to a lot of work that Ryan put into this particular project and the negotiations with the company, that the form of the agreement was a very favorable agreement and isn't what I would consider boilerplate from the perspective of the solar company. It took some teeth pulling and asking for things that it sounds like typically they wouldn't give up or provide in the negotiations, but Renee and Ryan drove a hard bargain, and I think it's resulted in the draft that you have in front of you.
Yeah, I think a perfect summary. I do. There was definitely concessions on their part in things that they weren't used to being pushed back on. I think some of that is just the legal expertise that Renee brings to the table and understanding some of the ways things are worded. And so, so as far as a contract, I know at the Board of Public Works meeting, it was a 5-0 decision based largely on the things I'll discuss, but also Renee's recommendation that it was a good contract. And she said her indication to the board was there's no reason because of the contract not to move forward. So speaking to the reasons that I brought to the table for the Board of Public Works to move forward with a solar contract with GenPro, and going back to why did we investigate this in the first place. When we first started down this road, Al Granginette, the chairman of the board, and I started having conversations with them. We really wanted, we saw the benefit of hedging a percentage of our power, meaning that we would lock in pricing for 30 years with no upfront, well, minimal upfront cost from us other than the interconnection, it connecting to our power system will have some costs there. But the overall solar system will have no ownership and no insurance or maintenance with it. So locking in a fixed rate on our electricity for what equates to about 10% of our power, we felt was a really good thing. And so we kept driving forward with it, and the price that we saw really is the driver that made us say, okay, this is something that we can do and affordably be a benefit to Wahoo. And so some of the reasons the board that I discussed, why I recommended that we move forward, hedging power, and we do a lot of hedging on our natural gas system. As a reminder, we're a customer of Nebraska Public Power District, so we buy the vast majority of our power currently from NPPD. We also buy about 14 to 16%, depending on the year, of our annual power from a company from WAPA, which is a branch of the federal government, and that's primarily hydropower contracts that were awarded long time ago, and so we're fixed on that amount of power that we can buy. And so this power is just going to be what's allowed under our wholesale contract with NPPD. We're allowed to buy up to 2 megawatts of power, and so that's what this contract, the scale of size allows for the pricing to come down. So we're building a 2 megawatt system, and so we'll be purchasing that power from them. A couple things I want to hit on, that comes up with solar. I think last year's polar vortex event always makes people nervous, right? I think a lot of the media coverage was surrounded around, well, solar and wind unavailability drove a lot of that. Not getting into the specifics of that, I'll just say that this power will be power that, if produced, will be obligated to buy the power that it produces, but it's not a source of power we rely on. So whether in a weather event or not, this solar power is available will not impact our ability to produce power. We currently get all our power from NPPD. The same source will be there, and so that won't change at all. This is just another way in which electricity will enter into our current system. Another discussion at the board, I think was a good discussion, a good question, was on rates. Would this impact our rates going up if we're buying power from a new, in a sense, we are going to see on an annual basis about a 1% increase in our overall wholesale costs, and so we average about $4.4 million a year on our wholesale electricity we buy. So about a $40,000 to $50,000 increase in our overall operating purchasing power. And again, there's a lot of ambiguity there. A lot of details as to whether or not it would really be an increase. But based on some of the models I've run and looked at and some of the numbers, we would probably see about that much of a price increase. And the answer is no. $50,000 increase in our overall wholesale power is very marginal. And so we would not need in any way to raise rates to pay for this project. So I want to make that very clear. The benefits, I've talked about hedging. We're buying power that is going to both be energy we buy, but also reduces our demand charges from NPPD. And it's a 30-year contract. So right now, that power is slightly more expensive than what we're buying from NPPD. But in over 30 years, and they do a tremendous job. We're very proud to be customers of NPPD. They do everything they can to keep rates down. But I think it would be a safe bet to say over the next 30 years, their rates will probably have to go up as input costs do. And as their rates go up, this will become less and less of a slight cost increase to actually saving us money. So the other big part, the hedging is a huge part why I recommended the board. And then the other big part was the economic development. Whether we as a community believe investing in carbon-free energy is, you know, the main reason or driver. There is a lot of businesses that's a reason why they choose where to place their business. A lot of people want to see a portion of their local energy coming from carbon-free energy. And so that can put us into a place where businesses might be attracted to locating in Wahoo based on this power being available and being produced right here locally. And I don't want to really speak to specific projects, but I know of projects around Nebraska where they chose not to locate in communities due to the lack of renewable energy. So again, I'm not coming to the board. I didn't come to the board saying that's why we should do it for the carbon reduction, but I would say it is an added benefit. You know, the hedging is probably the number one driver, and then the secondary added benefit of it being something that could be beneficial to economic development. I would also add to that overall discussion that something we haven't discussed, you know, long term with this project, we do have the availability to have a solar-based rate, so customers could, in theory, lock their rates because we know what this energy is going to cost us. Residential customers and potentially small commercial could lock their rates and know that they can buy their power, and so that would also be another way to narrow down any sort of a cost increase. Yeah, so those were the recommendations. It was a 5-0 decision by the board. I don't know if Ryan, Chris, you have anything to add to the board's discussion?
What I'll add is that you did cover the points that we had talked about in detail, and I think the thing that stood out most for me was the locking in for 30 years. That was huge. So
I think the long-term hedge will have benefits.
And even though this contract is with Sol Systems, they're the investing group, the operator of the system is GenPro Solutions right out of Grand Island, Nebraska. So they have contracts with, they did a project with Fremont. I wished I remembered all of them off the top of my head. Lexington, I believe. What's that? Central City. Central City, yeah, it had a big project. I believe Aurora, Nebraska might have done something with them on their wastewater plant. So I hope I'm not messing some of those details up, but they are across the state of Nebraska, and they're a real good partner with. They have really moved into working with municipalities on this type of thing. So, in the contract, is there some ability for them to not produce or those sorts of things? We've added protections on that, but what we've seen from their data, they tend to exceed their production. What they think they're going to produce. So, yeah.
Well, and one thing, not that I don't want to necessarily give too much information, but since it is public, the property that the solar system sits on was generously donated as a remainder interest to the Library Foundation. So ultimately, the city is going to be a beneficiary, both the consumer on the energy, but also years down the road with respect to the leasing of the property itself to the solar farm. So it's a real advantage from that perspective too.
And just a reminder of the location, it is just just east of Omaha Steel. So I think it's a perfect location. I think things have come together really well on this. It was definitely tough negotiations, but I'm very thankful that I'm standing here before you making this recommendation to move forward.
It looks like a good agreement. I have one question. I've got Phil Meyer's bullet points. And I think it's number 5 or something. The other primary responsibility of the city is to ensure the city's power system is not offline for more than 48 daylight hours per year.
Right. And so that was something that was one of those ticky-tack. So in order for this to produce power, it has to be connected to our electric system. And the way electricity works, you've got to have demand pulling those electrons right out of these solar panels into it. So in order for that energy to move, our system has to be up and running. And so that line specifically that it ties into can only be down for 48 hours in a calendar year. What we did there was they had pushed back on some protections we wanted. We wanted to ensure that their system couldn't be down for more than 7 days in a year, and had some negotiations. And so one concession they made was all the carve-outs we have for protecting And force majeure includes any act of God, storms, weather events, failures of equipment that we don't manage. So, for example, a couple weeks ago we had that power outage. The whole town was out of power because of a failure on NPPD's system. That would not count towards our 48 hours. That's not something we, owner operator, can control. And so I feel confident that if we had an outage on the line it's tied to for 48, that would be 2 straight days of power without, or a total of 2 days of power in a calendar year. My least concern would be the solar contract. It would be the customers. That's our driver. So the penalty would be then we would be buying power from them that we don't even use. That would be the penalty. So it's essentially, wasting that
And
energy.
it's the line from the solar farm to back to town?
It'd be any line that it ties to. Specifically, that line runs out to the rendering facility. So, like I said, if that line was out for 48 hours in 1 year, I'd have a bigger fish to fry. So our operating system, I know we get frustrated when we have outages and it seems like, oh geez, they're out all the time, but our total hours out in a year outside of massive events, out of our control like NPPD, is very rare for long term. So
I think we're a little bit spoiled in our downtime. It's frustrating.
Yeah.
Always happens at the wrong time.
I do feel very good about that carve out though, that we did get some concessions there on the contract that I feel just fine about. I will never be nervous not meeting that.
Any other questions from the council?
I'm positive you guys have looked at this and engineers already know, but you said east of Omaha Steel. So an awful lot of floodplain out there.
Yeah, so it's it'll be designed for being up out of the floodplain. Yeah, it has been. It will be
out there.
It's in the flood. I always get these two wrong. It's in the floodway, but not it's floodplain, but not the floodway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you make it beautiful since I drive by that like 4 times a week going out to the farm?
I will say one thing about flood. You remember in 2019, GenPro's solar system is placed out by the well field in Fremont, and when that flood happened, their solar system kept producing power, even though it was record flood that had ever been in Fremont, Nebraska. So, in fact, he anecdotally said that was working, and I think he said he didn't. There might have been something at the coal-fired power plant that couldn't run. So, again, I think that's just him being a salesperson saying that, but I will say that they stand by that they think it'll produce in floods and all weather.
Anything else?
Make a motion to approve?
Second.
Get those? Okay. Any other questions? Roll call on item number 2, approval of the purchase power agreement. Roll call.
Krejci,
Yes.
Ideas,
Yes.
Warford,
Yes.
Booth,
Yes.
Rappel,
Yes.
Nagel.
Yes.
Okay, number 3 ties in with that, approval of interconnection agreement with Sol Systems as recommended by the Board of Public Works, and the authorization for the mayor to sign said contract.
So I'll speak to the general idea behind the interconnection agreement. So we're agreeing now to buy power from them. We have to have a coinciding agreement that says we're allowing our 2 electric systems to be tied together. They have the same agreement with Nebraska Public Power District, and they will be regulated heavily based on NPPD as the operator of the Southwest Power Pool. So I think I could say, based on what Renee had explained, that this is pretty boilerplate, this agreement. There wasn't a lot of substance to it. It does stipulate our costs and associated with it. We are going to be responsible for connecting it to our power system, which would be what we'd want to do anyway. And so whatever costs are associated with that, they call out. And and then it also stipulates where what we own and where their ownership starts and ends. So it's just a legal document stipulating those things.
I'd move to approve.
Second.
Agreement.
Who seconded?
Nagel.
Okay. Any other questions? Roll call.
Ideas?
Yes.
Nagel?
Yes.
Krejci?
Yes.
Boop?
Yes.
Warford?
Yes.
Raffle?
Yes.
Thank you, Ryan. Action's not requiring a public hearing. There's a spot here for mayor's comments on items not on the agenda. I was prepared, I guess, for the question that did come up regarding the sign up by Kennedy College. So if any council members have any questions on that, but I think we're beyond that at this point. Okay, not requiring a public hearing. We have had a public hearing on this last week or 2 weeks ago. We did have probably a second public hearing on this. I'm not sure of other items that have come up other than maybe a document, and I'll address that. But the first item is the third reading on ordinance 2393 to amend zoning code C1 to allow for ground level residential a conditional use. I believe there was some information presented to the planning and zoning. You have a copy of it here. Travis, do you have any comments?
No, nothing really new to add, I guess. It hasn't been discussed before. The planning commission had visited about this a little bit. Again, nothing really more to add. They just kind of reviewed everything and tried to talk out the pros and the cons, I guess, of where it would be. And it, you know, there's still a mixture of opinions, I guess, of whether it would be something that we needed or something that would not be needed. So nothing new to recommend, I guess.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if the council has had a chance to review this, but it is the third reading. At this point, this would be a chance to amend, if anybody has thoughts there. Otherwise, it's down to the last reading, the last time. So discussion from the council.
No, and the only two comments I'd make now, since we're talking about potentially amending, and it's more just questions for you guys to think about for purposes of policy decisions, not legal issues, is based on the draft ordinance right now, we have kind of the ambiguous reference to adjacency, right? The idea of it being adjacent. We talked about it at 2 council meetings ago about what constitutes adjacency. Is it that the physical building has to be pointed at and or towards one of those residential zoning jurisdictions? Or if any part of that lot abuts those residential zoning jurisdiction, does it matter with respect to what the face of the building is? Again, that's just a policy question. I'd say that if we care about that, we probably need to clarify exactly what we're talking about with respect to that requirement. The only other more practical question I guess I have is when I start going through Google Earth and then the GIS, I question whether or not Maple Street in particular makes sense with respect to this. And again, it's more the same issue, which is if I look at Maple Street, one, Maple Street doesn't exist for a significant portion of that area. And then two, as you're running down south until you get to about 8th Street, all of those are block wide lots. And so we get into the same issue of that lot itself is both adjacent to Chestnut, which this says is expressly barred, and adjacent to Maple. And so, and then as you get through and you get into downtown, then there is no adjacency for about 3 blocks, right? Because it's commercial on both sides. And so as I just look down Chestnut or Maple Street, I question whether or not that also ought to be a carve out with respect to, you're already carving out Chestnut, you're carving out 5th Street. Should you think about Maple as well? More from a practical perspective than anything. But those are my only 2 thoughts looking at the language of the proposed ordinance.
Okay. Council?
So I had a pretty lengthy conversation with some people from planning the other day and spent some time driving around downtown at what is available, what isn't available, where things could be expanded and things like that. And I know we tried this once before, but I don't know that we had the right direction of sending it back to planning for wording, because there was a lot of concerns that were brought up about how this would actually function. Some talk about, in my mind as we're doing this, and again, it's just in my mind, it would be sure, we could have some ground floor apartments. Ideally, I would assume most developers, most people would want to turn that into commercial space eventually, because commercial space generally makes more money. So I thought was, well, yeah, it could be ground floor apartments, but one of the conditions would be that they're easily converted over to apartments, given a year's notice or something like that. But then it came up, okay, well, where do we stand with the legal aspect of telling somebody that their apartment is no longer zoned correctly because the conditional use permit is being allowed to expire? Can we even evict them? Things like that. So I think some of this got a little muddier than I had anticipated through some of those conversations. So my thought process at the very least is to slow this thing down, get it back to planning and have more conversation about it. Otherwise, my other concern is, I guess I still had I would say 8 to 10-year-old vision of downtown, because I don't work down here and I'm not down often enough, I guess. So I took a nice drive through downtown looking for where all of those empty buildings are that aren't there anymore. It's filled in really well down here. So that commercial space does become more of a premium, where I have a firm belief that we have a huge need for housing in this town. I also don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot with a need for commercial space that I feel like is starting to run out as well. So again, my thought at least, I know I was the one who was forge ahead, get it done. I'm starting to think at the very least we maybe slow down and rethink this, because some of what we discussed the other day, 2 weeks ago, whatever, made, I don't know, makes you stop and think that I don't know that we're quite prepared to jump into that as worded. Said some of it, I think the biggest thing was, again, in my mind, it was, well, what do we do? If that space could be converted back to apartments, we could do that. And I thought that's part of a conditional use. We say, okay, yep, you have conditional use, but it's always on an annual basis, and well, everything's full, we want that back to commercial space, let's make that happen. Well, that becomes a problem in having to evict people, and I don't know where the legalities come into play with all of that. So I think there's more questions there than I think we're prepared to answer, at least that I'm prepared to answer to jump into. So I don't know where everybody else's thought is.
To follow that, I mean, the more we talk about this, the more complicated this gets.
Right.
I think we've had a lot of people express a lot of issues that we just, unintended consequences.
Right, that's exactly right. The unintended, I thought it's a conditional use, which means we set that as a condition. We set, like, we're concerned about that, we set that as a condition. Right. Nothing is being granted, it's being set as a condition. Right. But some of those conditions that we think we can roll back, maybe we can't. And that could get messy pretty quick.
Yeah.
I agree, there's too many uncertainties of what could happen or.
It's been some good discussion.
Absolutely. I can say from my standpoint, voting yes on the first 2 readings was probably more about, in the current format, about keeping it moving and keeping the dialogue going, because I feel like there's meaningful conversation to be had here. And I think that's still evident even at the planning commission, because it's not a unified consensus that that this is not to move forward or should move forward. And so what I think would be still meaningful would be, I know Mr. Sullivan has a passion for this, and if there's 1 or 2 or 3 that are on planning that think it makes sense, maybe there's just a little subcommittee there that could start, that could try to come up with something that maybe makes more sense, that's more agreeable.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, same thing. I was like, well, let's keep it moving forward, because I hate things just getting stalled out or sitting on the table. But now that we're at the end, I don't know that we've made enough necessary changes or made it the right thing that we wanted to see.
To make an amendment.
To make it. And it's, planning doesn't meet for another month?
Next week.
Next week. Okay, I just knew, they couldn't meet before this meeting had come.
Yeah.
But I definitely want to see it go back to planning. And I don't know how that's done, but I would like to see that come out with a recommendation, whether it's different wording or whatever, not just a discussion there, but I don't know if that's possible.
Mm-hmm.
We can send it back, but I would like to see that done with different verbiage and some sort of recommendation, as opposed to just going back and discussing it. I'd like to see something done.
And that's where I think it needs to unwind one more layer, because I think planning's probably had enough conversation on this topic as well as that group, that maybe it needs to even go one step back and maybe come up with 2 or 3 options that might be a little more palatable to get 100% agreements, because I think that's what we would like to see, is the people that deal with planning and zoning are better well-read than we are in that, and we'd like their consensus to come to council.
I would more like to look at canceling this and starting over. Because I think being at the planning commission's meeting, I'm almost thinking they're tired of talking about it.
One way of, instead of killing or canceling, would be to table this for further study. And whether that study is strictly planning and zoning or city, we've had a conversation internally. Maybe there should be some kind of a partnership between the city and a developer, because we need parking. Parking for a unit and parking for downtown. So maybe that's something we could do. City would have to analyze that,
But wouldn't tabling it give some time frame involved that we would, at some point in time, pull it off? And from what I'm hearing, it seems like we're back to the square one.
Okay.
And
Well,
I think everybody is.
the option still would be out there, a motion not to.
Yeah, I mean, so you basically have 2 things on the third reading. You could either, you don't have to vote to deny, because an absence of a vote to approve is a denial and it comes off, right? So to the extent that you don't have a first and a second on that, either to table or to do that, it just kills the ordinance, right? Or to the extent that you do want to further discuss it, then you're gonna need a motion and a second to table and a majority approval to table.
You don't have to have a date on a table, but I think it will continue to be.
I think it would progress anyway, even if it was not on the table, but I mean.
That was my concern. My only concern with tabling it, or with not tabling it, with killing it, is that it doesn't progress and it just
Loses traction.
I'm more worried about use the chestnut zoning issue, right? I was the first one to, well, let's just kill it and then we'll bring it back. Well, here we are 6 months later and we still haven't had any advancement on that.
Yeah.
So I just hate killing things because, well, then it falls off, and I just don't want to see it fall off. I want to see it continue to be worked until either it comes to a place where it can be resolved, or no, you know what, this one way or another, it doesn't make sense and we end up killing it at that point. But I just feel like if we shut it down now, it just won't come back up.
Okay.
And I'd like to see the
Maybe it should be
project
on the
continue.
table.
So that's my thought anyway.
The developer is here. I will allow him to speak.
Yeah, so Mike Sullivan, trying to move forward with some sort of conditional use. I'd just like to reiterate the steps that I've taken in the past to try to manipulate some sort of a vocabulary that does meet the needs of the city, also the planning committee and the council. I've put together a couple suggestions in the past, and they've just been pushed back pretty much a no. I continue to come to every meeting to try to work towards some vocabulary that will work. My last meeting I presented some, carving out the streets. I put down numerous more streets to potentially carve out. My architect and I discussed some transitional zoning, across the street from residential, etc. As the gentleman mentioned, this is just conditional use to allow some apartments to be put on the first floor of downtown. There's not specifics to that. There's no number of apartments on the first floor. There's no location to those apartments on the first floor. It's just the allowance to do the apartments on the first floor. I do want to have commercial on the first floor as an element to my development of what I'm trying to put towards the city, and I'll get to that phase, potentially I'll get to that phase if things go forward. I am mindful of the downtown landscaping and cityscape. And I do think, Linden and Fifth need to be respected as commercial bays on the first floor. I'm not pushing back on those items. Again, I'm just trying to work with some body of government, of policy, to figure out what will be allowed before I take more steps forward, which are riskier. Every step gets riskier for the developer, not for the city, to push this project forward. So, whatever, and I've been through this process quite a few times, and no disrespect to anyone, but I just try to work with someone that'll give me some words to put down that'll work. And I'll take no's for a while. I have been taking no's for quite a long time, but also I need to recognize that the city doesn't want this project to happen. That's fine too. I respect that as well. But I'm trying to put in a lot of capital downtown Wahoo because I'm passionate about it. I'd like to see Wahoo grow. I have an idea and a concept that will help Wahoo grow. And I want to work with people that want to support my concept. So, the project could be a large project, but it could also be zero project. So that's just what I want to say as a reiteration of I'm trying to be pro-growth, pro-development, support other people that are also doing the same thing. So I would like the opportunity to talk to those people, committee or council, doesn't matter, to move those things forward. So thank you.
I guess just to make a comment, I appreciate your time on this, but your project is one location, and we are talking about a
entire zoning district.
Entire zoning district. So
we're not carving out one spot.
But it's one door, right? You have to open the door for
yes, I appreciate your efforts. Yeah.
Or 10 projects.
Yes. Yeah.
And to that point, I mean, this will be conditional use for the project I'm pushing through. This is my application. Other people that want to go through the same process will have to go through the hell that I'm going through as well to do that second project and third project and fourth. Correct?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that'll be their opportunity.
If we put this in, they would just have to apply for the conditional use permit side of it. They wouldn't have to go to planning for all of this to get it redone for an area they want to be. If it's listed that the fringe areas of the C1 can have it, it doesn't stop them from having to go through that whole process. They just have to do the conditional use.
Correct. But there's policies in place that will restrict that project from moving forward. The big one that, like you said, is parking, which is huge. So that'll be a big speed bump for people to get over if you're going to, as an apartment on the first floor. So I really don't think you'll have a lot of control over those projects if they ever come up again. So.
True.
Any other discussion? I agree with the fact that, well, this has taken 6 weeks, but that's the process. We could have
started in October.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as far as this particular hearing, and we didn't waive 3 readings. We've gone through the full, and tonight is the night to have to do something with it. As I think about housing, and that's been our concern for years, when you look at North Highlands, you look at your project with Camel Hall, we look at what's JEO's looking at on some property they purchased a month ago, excluding the one that the sign just went up, but adding in yours, we're about 250 houses that we're looking at. That's quite a few. So maybe we'll come up with the right thing at the right time when we soak all that up. And then there's west of the road going out to the lake, purchased there by a developer. I don't know how many lots are there, but so that's my comments. Again, I'd like something done. We've already got some things that we're talking about on C1. Maybe this all fits together when we get through that we talked about last fall. So, what is the council's? Is there anyone willing to introduce the third and final reading? ask it.
Again, my concern, from Mike's comments, I don't know if he wants this to be dragged out any further, so I guess I don't know where we go with that. As the applicant for the process, you know, I wanna be at least a little bit respectful of that, but, I know I'm not prepared to push this through today, so it would be a table for me. And I would make a motion to table the project, send it back to planning and zoning, with a request for them to come back with either different verbiage or different or a recommendation one way or the other.
And I think we probably ought to make sure that's in the motion, only because as I understand it, I didn't attend the planning commission meeting, but there was some question of whether or not it was appropriate for them to make a recommendation, and I think we just need to make clear that that's what you're asking.
That's what I'm
So probably just a motion to table.
Again, motion to table with the request to send it back to planning and zoning with the intent of coming back with different verbiage or recommendation one way or another. Something to that effect. Because I know that there were concerns raised there that we hadn't addressed in what's here right now, so.
Okay, is there a second?
I would second that.
Okay, so for clarification for the minutes, motion made and seconded to table any action on this ordinance and send it back to planning and zoning for further study. Would that be a fair? Okay, is that okay? Any other questions? Okay, roll call on the motion to table.
Warford,
Yes.
Krejci,
Yes.
Nagel,
Yes.
Rappel,
Yes.
Boop,
Yes.
Ideas.
Yes.
Okay, we will continue with that to move forward. Number 2, approval to occupy city right-of-way for private sewer line at 128 West Slope Drive. Travis?
Yeah, so you should have a drawing, aerial of the location. There's a new house going on that lot there. When Heritage Heights was developed, there is a manhole that starts at the corner of that property. The contractor would like to, because of the close proximity to the neighboring house, rather than coming out that side and connecting to the manhole, he would like to go out the other side of the house with 4-inch, continue that 4-inch over to the city right-of-way, and then basically extend a 6-inch line from the manhole to the west. So you have a 6-inch sewer line basically underneath the driveway and everything else, mainly for their purpose to not have issues hopefully in the future or whatnot. This is not an extension of utility main by any means. I had discussions with Ryan with the utilities, and that's one thing we want to make clear with this, is that it would not be the responsibility of the utilities to maintain this line. This is merely an extension of a private sewer. But being as it is in the right of way, rather than just crossing it and doing a normal connection like we normally would, and it's actually occupying the right of way, I feel that we need to have city council's blessing for that, basically, and that would provide our record of that it is for sure
This would
private.
count as proper documentation then, that it's
Nice.
private line, 4-inch
Yes.
and 6
Gonna
inch.
make them put some double cleanouts in there with that 90?
So yeah, they would basically bring that 6-inch over and they'd have it clean out for their sewer. We would have them connect in the lower portion of the manhole in the flow line of that, so we don't have issues with our manhole connection. Like I said, I discussed this with Ryan and he is okay with the process, but it would be up to the city as far as approval of occupying that right of way.
You'll have some fun cleaning that one out, Ryan.
It's
That manhole, because there won't be a lot of flow through there, and so it won't wanna continue through.
It takes up all Heritage Heights, so it should be.
But I mean, it flows, that's the first thing that's gonna tie into that manhole, and then it flows to the south, or does it flow north?
Yeah, the connection wouldn't be any different.
I'm just trying to figure out, because the map, it shows triangle.
Right, that
to
is
the
basically
south.
the end of the line. This would be the only house at the end of that. The connection isn't really any different. It's just basically the approval of the 6-inch in the right of way. The way it was designed basically before is that house would just connect onto that manhole and I believe Melissa had said originally when Heritage Heights was approved though, this was not gonna be a buildable lot, is that?
Right, it was intended to be an entrance as the farm ground to the north was going to be a park space.
But I believe that we've had similar situations where we're occupying right of way. We basically need the blessing of doing so that if for some reason we need to do something that way.
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically,
Yeah.
It's nice to have
if
the
someone
clarity.
was ever to question whether it was a private sewer in or out.
It's very clear.
Yeah.
It's very clear.
Need to document it, make sure it's somehow, because unfortunately, when we don't draft an easement and record the easement against the property, we need to make sure internally we have good enough records that if a future habitant complains, we can point to that.
Yeah. Motion to approve.
Remind me.
Second.
Is there anything saying that if we need that right of way for later with this approval, that we would have to do something to address the sewer line at that time then?
Yeah, I mean, so if as an example, we don't use a private easement and have conditions in the private easement that prescribe and allow us to discontinue the use or whatever the case may be, to require them to move it or otherwise, then once it's placed, they would have a duty to maintain it, but I don't know that we could require them to move it or alter it in some way because we'd be using our eminent domain authority to require them to do so. Right? And so if we thought we needed that protection on their dime, forcing them to do something down the road, we really would need an easement. We'd grant them an easement, and the easement terms would say the grantee, them, are required to do this, this, and this. That may be overkill though, so.
It could happen.
Yeah. If we internally document it well enough, then I think most of the risk is gone. But I think in terms of, to your question, could we make them move it? Could we make them do this, that, or the other thing? That would probably prove difficult.
Do you think that should be written in before or get approval based on that protection?
Yeah, so the only question to me, if we were being abundantly cautious, we would approve it subject to an easement agreement, right? And then I would simply work with Ryan and Travis to draw up the terms of the easement that are favorable to the city, and we'd record their use of the right-of-way pursuant to an easement.
What's a situation in which we would ask them to
That's
move
what I
it?
guess I'm trying to think of, a situation where we would ask them to move at their cost.
Yeah, I don't know that.
I don't know.
And would it be that significant of a cost, even if we did, right? And that's where I don't wanna make things more complicated than they have to be, but,
I can't, there's,
Yeah.
from a utility side of things, there's lots of times where we come in and do a new water or sewer main, and then their service line is connecting to our city main, it is in right of way, a little different, cause it's clearly a smaller service, but if we need to move it and those sorts of, we damage, we always do it at our costs, that's just the right thing to do.
yeah.
So I don't see, unless you see any reason we would need to move.
No, we've done a use of right-of-way agreement for like parking, that this is a little different than parking.
I just don't see anything.
Yeah, I think the biggest risk is the maintenance issues, and obviously as we document it well enough and we keep it in the file for that particular property, we're gonna be able to, and it's on them, since it's not a recorded easement, to advise whoever the future buyer is that exists, and if they don't, then that doesn't really affect us as a city.
I would move to approve it.
Stuart
Oh,
already did.
second?
It was already seconded.
It was
Oh,
already
we're,
seconded.
wow.
This was
Much
discussion.
farther along. We're much farther along than I thought we were.
One of us.
Who made what now? You made the motion?
No,
Stuart,
apparently I'm way behind.
This was discussion.
This is a discussion
It was
after.
a long discussion. I just got lost.
Are we ready to vote? Okay, roll call on the approval to occupy city right of way. Number 2. Roll call.
Creachy,
Yes.
Nagel,
Yes.
Warford,
Yes.
Raffle,
Yes.
Luke,
Yes.
Ideas.
Yes.
Number 3, resolution to authorize placement of stop sign on the northeast corner of Hackberry Street and Westdale Lane.
Makes sense? Yep. With the parking lot there, and people not stopping when they
I
turn.
think that there was, we've talked about it, I think there was a stop sign there, but just to be clear, this resolution makes it very clear we have the authority to put the stop sign there, and then if someone runs it, the police department has the authority to issue a citation.
Yeah, I'm totally for it. If it's a safety issue, I'll make the motion.
Okay,
Second.
second. Question? Roll call.
Rappel,
Yes.
Krejci,
Yes.
Ideas,
Yes.
Nagel,
Yes.
Luke,
Yes.
Warford.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Council, any comments on items that aren't on the agenda?
Just a reminder to the street committee, there is a street committee meeting before the next council, starting at 5:30. And we can do that here.
Okay, if there's no other business, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Question? Roll call. All in favor, stand.
Did I miss a meeting?